created, the mineral value, the free lunch. And the physiocrats called that the single tax because they wanted to get rid of the French aristocracy that just lived off its land rent and government bonds. Adam Smith said England, if it's going to compete with foreign countries, has to keep down the rents that the landlords get. David Ricardo developed the concept of economic rent to say we've got to get rid of the protective tariffs that protect agriculture so that you're not going to get a free ride for the landed aristocracy, the heirs of the Norman invaders who conquered England in 1066. John Stuart Mill became one of the philosophic radicals, or Ricardian radicals, and wanted to basically either nationalize or tax the land. And Marx extended this idea to the financial sector in the third volume of Capital, and also elaborated the theory of rent in the second volume. That became the socialist idea, to essentially tax land and to have the government provide the credit for banking instead of private bankers, so that you'd get rid of the fire sector, and that would be how the government would make its money. The idea also was that the government should supply the basic infrastructure, transportation, roads, and should recapture the value of all of this spending, the land value that it created by the land tax. So the whole idea was activist, not only on the left wing of the spectrum by John Stuart Mill, but on the right wing. In the United States, the business industry wanted government protective tariffs. They wanted the government to build infrastructure to take the external costs of production, the transportation, and the others over. And what Marx said was that a lot of the economic surplus was exploited from the productive class, and he gave it a political coloration that was pretty much what Adam Smith and Mill and the others had said, but the way in which he put it, focusing on wealth that was a free lunch was so upsetting to the vested interests that they said we've got to get an alternative to classical economics, and that alternative was to say that there's no such thing as unearned income. They said everybody earns their income, and the rich people earn their income by providing a service. The landlord provides the service of providing the land that nature provided. Bankers provide the service of lending the money that the government provides. And they developed a whole kind of junk economics that has sort of taken over to replace classical economics, leaving the universities who taught classical economy, basically only those that teach Marxism, because Marxism is the only form of the classical economics of Adam Smith and Ricardo and Mill that has survived in the curriculum now that you've had the anti-classical economists, the sort of apologists for high finance taking over.
You write that today matters are muddled by the fact that the anti-classical economics that emerged late in the 19th century calls itself neoclassical.
Yes, they don't. You have the right-wingers, especially the Republicans, saying, well, we're for free markets just like Adam Smith. But Adam Smith's idea of free market was a market free of rent and free of interest. He opposed foreign wars. He said, look, foreign wars lead to government debt. And if you have a government debt, then the government has to pay interest on it. And it pays the interest by levying taxes. So if you want a low-cost economy, you need an economy with low taxes, and that means a government that doesn't get into war. And so he and his contemporary, like Richard Price and others, opposed the British war in America. They said, give the American colonies their independence. Don't keep going to war with France over colonies. Stay out of war. And by the end of the Napoleonic Wars, England was paying about 3/4 of its entire budget on interest payments. That's what the Philippines are paying today. And so Adam Smith was anti-war. He was against the landlord sector. He said the natural tax base is the landed aristocracy because they don't do anything for the rent. They don't provide the land. Nature provided the land. They can get money on buildings, but not on the land. So he wanted to tax the landlords, and also in terms of banking. He was against the bankers making money on the national debt. So the right-wingers today, when they quote Smith, never have you actually read him. The last thing they'll do is teach what he wrote, and in fact, the history of economic thought has been dropped from the academic curriculum where it used to be a core course when I was getting my PhD in the 1960s.
Yes, you go on to say that neoclassical economics should rightly be called anti-classical because it avoids dealing with wealth, debt, and social structures.
That's exactly the point. They called it neoclassical so nobody would see that they've taken the words of the classical economists in the 19th century and they've used a kind of Orwellian doublethink. So a free market today is a market free of government regulation for predatory lenders and for landlords to get a free lunch, not an economy that's free of predatory credit and free of a free lunch. So it's an Orwellian exercise.
Well, what do you think of the term neoliberal?
The neoliberal is the opposite of the old liberal. It's another form of doublethink. The liberals in the 19th century were the people who wanted to tax land to free the market from rent and interest. The only way that you could do this in the 19th century was creating a democratic government strong enough to check the vested interest, to control real estate and finance, to subordinate it to the public wealth. Today, a neoliberal wants to get rid of government, to give a free rein to Wall Street, and neoliberals claim to be against centralized planning, but they're for centralized planning. They just want to shift centralized planning out of the hand of elected officials into the hands of Wall Street. And that's why Mr. Bernanke says that the hallmark of democracy is an independent Federal Reserve and an independent central bank. But that's actually the hallmark of oligarchy. If finance is the economy's planning center, then you want that controlled by the government and by elected officials. You don't want it controlled by Wall Street. That's the opposite of democracy.
Well, it's this mystification of the language that has everyone so confused and makes economics so difficult for people to comprehend.
So that's the purpose. If you're going to use an economic system that's exploitative, you want to tell people that they're getting rich by going into debt. You want them to think of, look at how much your house is going up in value, not how much do you have to borrow in order to buy a house to set up a family. They say, look at how much you're getting in your pension funds, without saying the higher stock and bond prices get, the lower the yield you get, and the more we're going to have to end up defaulting on your pensions and not paying you. So the whole idea is to make economics mystification.
Now, you quit teaching economics in 1972. Why was that?
I couldn't fit the real world into the curriculum. I wanted to talk about, to teach debt and finance, and indeed I was teaching that at the New School, at the graduate faculty of the New School for Social Research in New York, but my courses weren't the key curriculum courses. People were being sort of brainwashed. In order to get accredited as an economics department, the school was told you have to begin teaching macroeconomics and price theory and essentially Chicago school stuff. So Mr. Heilbronner, who ran the department, decided he wanted to get accredited rather than teach how the world actually worked. So I went to work for a think tank and left academia until I joined the University of Missouri at Kansas City about 5 years ago.
Now, you've said that the Chicago School of Economics was basically a trivialization of economic theory.
Yes, it essentially calls itself monetarism. It ignores debt. That's really the belief of Bernanke. They look at money supply, if you increase the money supply, as increasing consumer prices. But this isn't what money's spent for. 99.9% of money that passes through the clearinghouses every day are for bank loans and mortgages and stocks and bonds, not for GNP. The entire year's GDP is traded every single day on the stock exchange here in New York. So very little money is actually spent on the real economy. It's almost all used to affect the prices of real estate, stocks, and bonds. And you don't have these prices of wealth appear in the Chicago analysis. You don't have the maldistribution and increasing concentration of wealth taught at Chicago. You have them only looking at supply and demand of goods and services without asking who's getting rich off it. How do you